Sibanda to make more sense of the situation in Zimbabwe. Very good evening to you, Vusi. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure having you on the Globe.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Simpiwe, and good evening to the listeners. I'm happy to be here too.
Are you at all surprised at the latest developments, considering what's been happening in Zimbabwe over the past few days?
Well, definitely not. I mean, we know that the MDC Alliance, said they were not going to accept the result if, it did not, pronounce them as winners. So this has been brewing throughout the course of, the election, the elections, the counting period, and they've always been saying, look, they'll do anything, including going to the Constitutional Court. So yes, it's not really a surprise. It's expected. I mean, what's just a surprise is, the fact that they left it to the 11th hour.
Well, since the Constitutional Court is the highest body in Zimbabwe, if it doesn't rule in the MDC's favor, what's the next move for the MDC?
Well, I think it's probably the end of the road, because once they've taken it to court, when you go to court, you expect that the judgment is either going to be, in your favor, or, it's not going to be in your favor. So I'm not sure, because in the past we know that they were not happy. They say they will not accept, any result that say that they've lost. Yeah. But if the Constitutional Court, which is the apex, court in the land, obviously says, that they have lost, then it means that, they can't do anything. I mean, I'm not sure if they can think of lobbying, the international community just to say, look, they want their grievances to be heard, but I'm not sure if it can make much of a difference once, that has happened.
Let's discuss the nature of the MDC's legal challenge. I mean, what is it that they're seeking? Are they calling for a rerun of the elections? Are they calling for a recount of the election results? Or do they want the court to simply declare them the winners?
Well, look, I think one thing for sure, the court may not obviously just declare them the winners, but what is likely to happen is that in terms of the new constitution that we have now, the court can do three things. That is, it can obviously declare a winner, which can either of course it could be them. I mean, looking at if the evidence that they bring shows that of course it's very clear that they've been shortchanged. So the court could declare them a winner, or simply declare that Mr. Mnangagwa is the one that is won. That is the first option. And the next one is that the court could invalidate the election and say, look, this election is just so it's so wrong. Everything that has happened here cannot be sustained because there are gross irregularities, and which means that another election will be called within the specified period of time, which is I think about 30 or 21 days. I'm not completely sure. Or thirdly, what the court may do, it can give any other order, for example, depending again on the evidence that they have. The court could say, go and recount certain constituencies where it appears that there are irregularities, or anything that it finds, relatively suitable. But obviously, there are prayers that the MDC, Alliance has put forward, which unfortunately we're not aware of that what exactly are those prayers. But what we know is that they are saying that they have won the election. They are saying that, for example, what has been going around on social media is that, look, the presidential numbers, they are much higher than those for the National Assembly. So those are some of the discrepancies that they are bringing up. So whether they can be sustained or whether they have got the evidence to prove that, then it becomes, what's going to play in court. So in that event, I mean, in that case, what we are saying is their prayers will determine exactly, where we are going. But again, like I said, that I think one of the biggest problems that we have is, the fact that, they've left this case a little too late. And in my view, I would have said, look, maybe the horses have bolted, in the sense that you understand that they have filed at about 4 o'clock when it's time to go home. And what can ZANU-PF do, under the circumstances, or what can the government do? Because you've got about, I understand, 40, respondents that have got to be served. So what happens is we now have to deal with the technicalities of that. Can service be said to have taken place? Was the Chief Justice there? We know that there are, judges that are often, on standby, in terms of what the law often says. Yeah. But the issue is, if they served, at the close of business, what does the clerk, the registrar do? Do they say, okay, they have served, we knew this was coming, let's just, call, the Chief Justice and tell them that we've received the papers, or they put it in a file and wait for Monday? If that is the case, what then informs, the government to stop, the inauguration? Because one, they try to serve, all these 40, respondents, and after 4 o'clock, they've all left the offices. And the staff that is working on the inauguration, the invites and everything else, already at that stage, they have all gone. So they are waiting to convene on Sunday and to meet for the inauguration. So what exactly happens? Are we saying that the government has already been working and saying, okay, we are working, we're doing this by the ear, so that once we know that they've been to court, we just stop it? So it could be at the mercy of the government that they decide, you know what, it's all right. let's give them a chance and see what happens.
Yeah.
So that's a scenario that's likely to take place.
Okay. Now, historically, I mean, we all know that opposition parties, especially the losing parties, always cry foul. They always cry irregularities in each and every election. But none or fewer, if at all, of these parties have actually come forth with concrete evidence to actually prove that the elections were indeed rigged or there have been certain irregularities. So do we know what kind of irregularities or what kind of evidence that MDC has put forth?
Well, we do not know. What we have heard is that they've been talking about V11 forms, that, you know, the V11 forms and the information that was on the ZEC, you know, website shows that, you know, that's what they are using. It shows that, you know, their figures are incorrect. So in any case, you know, what they have right now, we are unsure of. I mean, we saw that during the course of the day when they went to court, you know, one of the lawyers was carrying a basket full, you know, of papers and documents, which is supposed probably to be evidence, but also court papers, I assume, because they've got 40 respondents. So the kind of evidence and the nature of that evidence is something that, you know, we wouldn't know until, you know, the time when it goes to court. But what exactly we are saying, I mean, I think in my view, what really matters now is the timing. In my view, I think becomes a bit of a concern, because then we're saying, what are the options that, you know, the government has? You know, they've sent out invites, and today being a Friday, they are, you know, when you look at the reasonable test, you know, that reasonably what could be done, invites are sent. For example, the president of South Africa and other countries that have been invited by 4 o'clock or so, when this, when people are serving these papers, yes, they've already left. I mean, they've gone home. Yes. So how do you stop everybody else that's gone out? The money that has been put in, the logistics, and that on its own, I find it something that, you know, the government could stand by and say, look, you know, we've already spent so much. You can actually have a mandamus, in my view, where, for example, somebody goes, you know, if it's possible, and they've acknowledged that they've received it. Somebody goes to court tomorrow or so and say, look, we want to have an urgent mandamus, which forces the government to actually have, you know, the inauguration. And, you know, they can argue, you know, in that way. I think it's a possibility. It might be quite small, but it is a possibility.
Now, analysts believe that the MDC has got little or no chance at all of success in this particular court bid, given the court's historic tilt towards ZANU-PF. Are you one of those who subscribe to such a school of thought?
I really think that the chances are almost nil, in my view, because we know that, you know, the courts, I mean, as they stand in Zimbabwe, they are actually captured because they actually belong, you know, to ZANU-PF. I mean, I completely believe that we do not have, you know, the Trust Politica, or what we call the separation of powers. I believe that the courts are completely controlled, you know, by the executive. And, you know, that is shown, for example, by the mere fact that the appointments, you know, for the Chief Justice and the judges are done, you know, by the President. And when you look at the Judge President, for example, I mean, I've always said this, the Judge President, I mean, George Hueshe is a retired, you know, brigadier who served under, you know, Vice President, I mean, Chiwenga. So, I mean, and I don't think that Chiwenga, you know, wants to retire now, because any result that comes now is going to retire Chiwenga and is not going to go back, yes, you know, to the army. So they'll do everything to ensure that, you know, they sustain and, I mean, uphold, you know, the result that was announced by ZEC. So the court, I don't see the court coming up and actually doing anything. If in any way the court is going to listen to this, I think there's a very good chance that it's going to slap, you know, the MDC with heavy costs. They're going to be paralyzed and completely destroyed.
Let's talk about President-elect Emmerson Mnangagwa's tweet. He said that Tendai Biti was released after his intervention. Should he read much into this, given the fact that he's always been preaching peace?
Well, I think the one thing is he could be saying, look, I mean, I'm very generous, despite the fact that, you know, this guy has been running away and he says that his life is in danger. You know, I am showing that his life is not in danger because I've allowed him, you know, I've got the powers to do, you know, to give a presidential pardon. But in this case, I've intervened to make sure that the courts can basically, you know, allow him, you know, bail. But in a way, it actually goes further to say, look, I've got so much, because this is not a presidential pardon. His mere tweet to say that I had to intervene tells us that he controls the judiciary. So that tells you that. So
you think he's been, I mean, he's being disingenuous, or he's being genuine in calling? Because some analysts believe that he actually called for his arrest and he also called for his freedom.
Yes, I mean, that shows that he's actually showing that I'm in control. He's actually showing that, look, I can do anything else. And the problem with such issues that when he said it, he could not have been aware of what he was saying at that stage to realize that, look, this was a catch-22 situation. He put himself, he thought he was actually trying to show that, look, you know, I'm a nice man. I'm not hunting for this man. But the irony is that he's actually showing that is what he controls the courts. because he tells them what to do. He controls the National Prosecuting Authority, tells them, go and arrest this man now, says, okay, leave him so that, I can show, for example, the United States and the EU that, I'm not persecuting the opposition. So that shows that it's not the National Prosecuting Authority that's doing their work.
All right. Vusumuzi Sibanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mbio.
That was a political analyst, Vusumuzi Sibanda, helping us to make sense of the developments in Zimbabwe.